All right. Well, don't want to wait too much longer. So thanks for joining us here on time at our final webinar, kind of connected to our new feature launch. Um, Today, we're going to kind of pick up a little bit where we left off with data forms and the things we were looking at on Tuesday. And then we can kind of do a full recap and just any other questions you guys have. So in the meantime, before I kind of get going here, if there are specific questions that you have, it can be anything about the app or running analyses or whatever it would be, go ahead and type that into either the chat or the Q&A, and I will make sure we talk about that. I've got a few things that I'll kind of go through here, but certainly if there are specific questions you guys have, put those out there for me and I will make sure we address them. So let's see. As I mentioned, we're kind of wrapping up here these first 5 webinars where we're going deep into the new features that we've recently added to Impact Dashboard. This is that graphic that's just showing us kind of each part of the app that was touched on as we added these new features. So helping you collect information in a kind of a deeper level, which would enable you to generate new project fact sheets and other types of reports, and then ultimately be able to analyze all of that more complex data with the impact analysis that we've enabled for existing projects. So in some ways it's all connected. In a lot of ways there are a lot of individual components that you need to keep track of. So agenda for today, just as I mentioned, we're going to continue discussing all about data forms. We're going to do a recap and then Q&A. Anything you guys have, we can certainly talk about. So feel free at any point to type those in. Here it is. It's our last day, September 24th. We're just doing the recap. If you've missed any of the webinars and you want to kind of either go back to one that you actually did attend, or if you missed one, we're going to have the videos posted on our on a new blog post, I believe, and so that will be getting linked up. So those videos will be available on YouTube, but access it from our website. The first one on September 10th, we screwed up and I did not record that one. So there's like a 17-minute version of that basic overview. So if you want to catch that, that's just on the update blog. So here we go. Let's see. The new features are live. They were all released last week. They're available to all users, accessible in previously created scenarios. As I've mentioned, we are currently trying to get some logos and other files back up there. So if you're noticing you're kind of missing a file or something, we're working on it, but let us know if there's something we can help you out with. So those are the new features that we discussed. This URL that we've got here, I'll post it in the chat for everyone. This has a lot of information for you to kind of jump off from. It has that handout that we looked at last week, or excuse me, last Tuesday, I guess it was. The handout, which is really helpful for seeing that flow chart around the wizard and all of the detailed questions and so forth. And then there's just a lot of information on that blog post. So if we keep moving, again, I've mentioned this every meeting here. We've got the knowledge base and support pages. Again, feel free to reach out to me directly by phone or email with your questions. So okay, we're going to jump back into data forms, and if we want to, one of the things we were doing last week was looking at it from the perspective of the prospect, where they were completing a data form wizard. And in order to do that, we were clicking on this link here to submit your data, and we were seeing what that looks like from the prospect's point of view. And then when we did that, and actually last week, or Tuesday rather, I submitted a data form to myself, and I can actually see that in my inbox. So I'm going to kind of just continue along the workflow, so to speak, of after someone has submitted the data form, what are the steps that you can take with it, and then we'll kind of circle back and talk again about configuring those data forms and how all of this comes together for you. So if you, we kind of talked a little bit about configuring the data forms at the end of last webinar, but we'll kind of touch on that again. But let's just follow that path. So when I receive a data form, it's going to appear in my inbox. So if I click here on my inbox, I'm going to see that this is the data form that I submitted last week. And really the only way that we can identify it right now is the date it was submitted and then the prospect's email. So normally this won't, this looks a little weird because it's my email address, but normally it's going to be like, you know, Bob at XYZ Corp. And so you'll be able to tell like, oh, that was the, you know, that was Bob who I was talking to at XYZ Corp, right? You know, if you see ones that are like, you know, Jim at Hotmail or whatever, it might be a little bit harder to identify, but if you click on this, so if you click on this as it's listed here in our inbox for data forms, it'll show us everything that was submitted with it. So here we can kind of get a sense of what's going on with the project, again, with the summary listed at the top, just in bullet point form. We can see exactly what they submitted. And then as we scroll further down, we see, you know, screen by screen, exactly what they typed in and submitted to us. So I'm gonna go back out to this inbox page. Really, if you know what this is all about, you know, if you know the prospect, oh, I was expecting that data form, so I'm just gonna create a project for it. You can go here. Again, we have two options. One is to delete it if it happens to be bad data or something weird and, you know, it's not really worthwhile keeping. But really what you're most likely going to do is create or assign it to a project. And you can do that by creating a new project or assigning it to an existing project. In my case, I'm going to create a brand new project. I'm just going to kind of go through the test example. So we'll say create new project. So when I do that, we're going to be basically taking this data form and kind of moving it into the folder along with this project, this new project that we're going to call just kind of, you know, test project, whatever. And as I'm doing this, you can see on this window, it's asking me that I've got this little checkbox. It's automatically checked, so it's kind of doing this if you know, without you having to do anything. But it says create scenario using this data. So I mean, first of all, we have that step where we have a project, and then within a project we have scenarios. So we're creating the project name, and then within that project we can actually create a scenario at the exact same time that we do all of this. So we're going to take that data form. We're going to make a copy of the inputs that the prospect provided. So we're not going to like mess up the data that the prospect sent us. We're just going to take a copy of it, and we're going to paste that into a new scenario for us, and then ultimately everything will be calculated for us, and all we'll have to do is review it, maybe configure some incentives, and print off the reports. So I'm going to hit create project and scenario here because we're going to take that data form that they submitted and create a scenario with it inside this brand new project called test project. And as I do that, we're going to kind of jump over to that area. It's going to create the project. It's going to assign the data form to that project. And then it's going to copy the data from the data form into a scenario. So that's where we are. So in the example that I submitted to myself last week or last Tuesday, we had indicated that it was an existing business. And if you remember in the data form, the button or the choice around business type is it's actually explained a little bit better to the prospect, and that's because we want the prospect to understand exactly what we mean. For a user who is, you know, when you're actually in here using the model, we kind of just shorten it a little bit so that you're not, you know, it doesn't look exactly the same as it does to the prospect. But the clarification here kind of explains what we mean when we say is it the business a new business, brand new to your community, or in the sense, is it an existing business that already operates in your community? And so that's the selection that you see here, which corresponded to a slightly different phrasing, I suppose, but more clarification for the prospect. So this is our scenario basics where we can identify business type, and it's going to have an expansion. What we don't, one of the things, or two of the things, I suppose, we do not ask of the prospect would be this project type and industry. These are kind of internal to your organization. And so it doesn't necessarily make sense to ask the prospect to classify their project. And so, you know, they might not even understand what any of these terms mean. These are terms that mean something to you and maybe to your stakeholders. And so you want to make this selection yourself. And so in this case, as we're looking at this, again, project type is something that you can define for your account. We've got these defaults thrown in here. This is kind of what everyone's account would look like as a starting point, but you can go in and modify these if you wanted to use instead of say recruitment or something, you wanted to have one that said relocation or something like that. You could do that. But anyway, in our case, I'm going to say that this is actually a business retention and expansion because we know it's an existing business that's planning an expansion. And as far as industry goes, we can again select this and make the appropriate selection here. I really don't remember what I was choosing. I think it was something with manufacturing. So I'm going to go ahead and hit advanced manufacturing here for the industry. Again, industry, it's not really tied, or it really isn't tied to any specific NAICS code necessarily. This is, again, more like your key industries or target industries that your organization might be focused on. And so you can kind of give them whatever name is appropriate, and it would be distinct from a separate input around the NAICS code. So if I hit next on this, we're going to go and identify the location of the project. The address that I typed in my data form will populate here. In my case, I was kind of making up a bad example for ourselves today. So I'm not going to, this should technically be in Austin, but we'll just leave it here at the city of Arlington. But it's a good point to point out that essentially the taxing districts that you select here will be independent from the address that gets mapped on the map here. So just be aware of that. It's a little tricky. When you're actually running an analysis, you need to make sure your taxing districts are set correctly. And then this is just adding an additional layer of information by putting a pin on the map. And then finally, the first screen that we see, these first three, we have one for scenario NAICS code. And so here we're asking what the NAICS code is for the project's activity. In this case, we've got this farm machinery manufacturing, which kind of implies or pulls in our multipliers for us. So this is telling us it's about 1.7. So if for a direct, for the type 2 employment multiplier of about 1.7, that's telling us for every direct job that's created, there will be 1.7 total jobs. So the one job plus 0.7 spin-off jobs. Now, we've got a couple check boxes here that are a little bit new for us. So we see, do we want to include spin-off impacts? And if that's the case, we'll leave that checked true, which it is in most cases. But if you wanted to kind of zero out those spin-off impacts, we can uncheck that and not include the spin-off impacts. And now, because we have an expansion project or an existing business that's planning an expansion, we have an additional checkbox here that says the current operations activity NAICS code is the same as the expansion. And I think this came up last week when someone asked, can we have a different NAICS code for the current operations and the expansion activity? And that's absolutely true. I think I gave the example of a car manufacturer. Maybe they have a manufacturing facility that happens to be in your community, and they're going to bring back the headquarters as well. So there might be a NAICS code associated with car manufacturing in one case, and then the headquarters activity would be the expansion part. So that's that. We're not actually going to do this. If we wanted to, we could. I'll just show you what it looks like, sorry. If I uncheck that, it just gives me the second input to say what the current operations are. But normally, I think in a lot of cases, it's going to be the same. However, if it's not the same, we can actually account for that now. So I hit close here. Now we're in our scenario, and so everything's been pulled in. This is, again, an existing business. So we've got our toggle up here that lets us focus on whether we're looking at the expansion impact or the total combined. All of the values that the prospect typed into the data form are plugged in here. These, again, it's a copy of the data form. We've taken the information that they gave us and basically just copied it in there. So, for example, let's say that they submitted that data form, and as a part of the project, as we look here, we can see they told us there were going to be 50 new jobs, right? Let's say that they submit the data form and, either later that day or the next week, they call and they say, hey, I put in 50 jobs, but I actually meant to put in 75 jobs. There should be another 25 jobs added in year 3. And so, okay, I've already started analyzing the project. I've taken the data form. I've made a copy of it here in the scenario. And I actually just want to plug in the extra 25 jobs because I just spoke to the prospect on the phone. So now what I can do is I'll plug that in right here. And so now we've got the latest and greatest analysis of things here. So we can see we're using 75 direct jobs on our expansion impact analysis. And we've kind of modified things as we needed to on the information going into the project. Now, one thing that as I mentioned, that's not going to affect what the prospect originally submitted in their data form. So if we wanted to go back at some point in the future and see, say you're getting confused and you're just like, what did they tell me originally? Because I've made changes. He called me about the 75 thing, and then he called me about something else, and then they called and said something else. And so like, let's just back up, and what did they actually tell me originally? And so if you need to see that, there's a couple of ways we can do it. When we're inside a scenario, we can click up here, and this is a new area. This little icon here with the dots and the lines and so forth. This is going to be kind of the full listing of the data form essentially. And so if I click up here, we're kind of near the settings area, but this is a new area where we call scenario and company info. So it's kind of the more detailed version of our scenario info page. So scenario info, we kind of cut it down to be just the impact related things so that we can kind of quickly and easily, generate an analysis. But if we want to get into all of the various inputs for a project, we can click up here to the scenario and company information. Now, when I do that, we're going to see everything gets repeated back to us. So anything that might have been on the scenario info page, there might be inputs for that here on the scenario and company page. So for example, like the jobs associated with the expansion, we had just changed this input. We had added the 25 jobs in year 3 to get us out to 75 total jobs. Now, some of the things that you can't see on the scenario info page would be things like the square footage. So for example, when I submitted the data form, I had filled out the square footage that we currently occupy. Here in our current operations, we currently have 50,000 square feet of manufacturing space and 50,000 square feet of office space. We don't see that information. There isn't a place to view that information or enter that information over here. So we're trying to keep this scenario info as consistent with kind of the previous version of the model. So everybody kind of remembers what the model used to look like before the 2 weeks ago, I suppose. We haven't gone and added a ton of fields and inputs to this page just because we have new fields for ourselves in the analysis. So things like square footage or even information about like what type of benefits do you offer, and even, for example, company information like when was the company established, are they an LLC or something like that. All of those fields, they kind of don't apply to trying to run an impact analysis, or they don't necessarily come into play as directly as these others where we want the job count and salaries and so on. So those fields will be available along with everything else. Think of this as kind of like the full database. If you click over here into the scenario and company information, this is going to be the full database of inputs for the scenario. So if we go and we want to look at whatever we said about the site. So, they put the address and they told me the lease and when the lease ends. Here's the square footage that we saw. They told me, they make tractors. All of these things that we can see back here, we may not necessarily need on the scenario info if we're just trying to kind of move quickly through and enter in the real major deal points. So here, this is a good example, the current operations activity. This pretty much matches up with the section that we saw over on the scenario info page. And so that's going to be kind of a one-to-one. And so what I'll point out is if you make a change here, for some reason, maybe they tell you there's a different number of existing jobs, they tell you 120. If you make that change here, be aware that that's going to actually apply across the entire thing. So you see it there. So essentially, it's a little weird, I guess, at first, but you have two ways to enter this information. You could put it here. Let's put it back to 100. You can put it here on the scenario info, or when you look at kind of putting all your chips on the table, putting all the details, when you would look at it here, you can see the values kind of, some of them will get repeated. But this is going to be kind of more of the comprehensive listing of all the fields. And then the scenario info is kind of the ones that you're all familiar with and that are kind of more important for the impact analysis. So this, just to kind of give you a lay of the land, if I scroll down here, we can see all the different sections. These are all the possible inputs they had in that data form. And actually, even if we hid certain sections, like for example, maybe we didn't want to ask them on the data form about hotel nights and visitors, we would still be able to see those fields here. So you could create a data form that maybe only had, let's just make it up, let's say they only had 5 fields in the data form. You only cared about 5 specific inputs. When you take that data form and you create a scenario, when you get into the scenario, you're going to have access to all of the different fields. Now, it's only going to fill in the 5 fields that were available to the prospect. So there, you won't have information for some of those fields that you didn't ask on the data form, but you will have inputs for them so that if you get information later on or wanted to fill it out later, you could go back and add them. So we can see all the different sections all the way along, everything that was entered by the prospect in that data form. Now, I made that point earlier, and I'll try to get back to it now. I apologize, I'm kind of taking a little rambling approach to this. But we had gotten that phone call. The prospect said, hey, I know I put 50 jobs in the data form, but it's actually 75. So as we're working through this project, we needed to go in and add the 25 jobs here. But then, as I say, maybe things go back and forth, and you're like, what did they tell me originally? And I'm just trying to figure out what, I've made so many changes to this thing, I don't really remember. If we go back up here to the very, very top, this is on that same page. If we go back all the way up to the top of this full listing of all of our inputs, we can see we've got this button here for View Submitted Data Form. And so this is where I can click on and get a look at the data form that prospect submitted to us. And if you remember, it might have been Thursday, the first week, we ran into a little bit of an error, but I'm glad it worked this time. I don't know why that was so slow, but I was thinking it was going to have the same problem as a couple of weeks ago, but it worked this time. And now we can see the data form that was submitted on September 22nd. It was submitted by this person, and we can see which template it came from even. And this is that summary, so I can see the full bullet point summary, and then I can scroll down and see the actual inputs. Now, one thing that I'll notice right away is that in the bullet point summary, we say project will create 50 jobs in the community and pay salaries of $75,000. If you remember, and I can go to that section here on this submitted data form, this is showing exactly what the prospect sent into us, and it shows the 50 jobs. So this is kind of frozen in time. We didn't make changes to this. We'll never make change to a data form, but within a scenario, as you're analyzing the project, you can make adjustments or add additional information that wasn't there originally, and that scenario will be using that information. So just as we see here, we had added an additional 25 jobs, so now there are 75 jobs associated with the expansion. If we look at the data form, again, they had originally told us it was only 50. So you can make changes and it doesn't affect this. And again, the way to look at the data form from inside that scenario would be to click on that tab over here where we get the full listing of all fields, and then choose View Submitted Data Form. As we saw, it opens in a brand new tab, and then we can kind of see these fields. If you'll notice too, we can't edit this data form. So if I'm clicking on this and I wanted to try to edit the data form that they submitted, you can't do that right now because it's already been submitted and it's kind of frozen in time. All right, so if you have questions and we want to dig into something or kind of back up on something, feel free to type that in and I'll make sure I get to it. I'm going to keep going here with this example that I plugged in. This, as we remember, was created with the data form that I submitted to myself, essentially. If I look at my reports, I can kind of get a look at everything. The fact sheet, actually, this one has a good bit of information because the prospect had submitted a lot. So they had told me the NAICS code, they told me some square footage for the expansion, told me what they were going to do, when they were going to break ground, and so forth. We see the company info. Then we can even see information about their current operations. We can see that getting summarized here as well. What we don't see is any description or any other of the text that we have added to some of our fields. So I'll talk about that a little bit. So in order to really kind of make this fact sheet look pretty cool, what you can do is add a description and a bunch of other text fields to this to this fact sheet. So if I click over here on my scenario and company information, this is where you're going to be able to do that. We can put a description here. I'm not, well, I'll just put like description area. And when we put some text here, so even if it's just some two words, we go back to our report, we'll see that fact sheet. We've got a new section here called description. And this is the text that I typed in, as silly as it is, just a little bit of text there for that spot. Now, the other things that we can do, which we've incorporated here. So we've got the internal notes that we mentioned that won't go anywhere. So if you can type whatever you want here, and that's not gonna, we're not gonna see that pop up on a report, either on the fact sheet or even the summary or detailed report. So the internal notes are fully internal. They're not gonna be anywhere unless you're logged in looking at the scenario. But then we have this due diligence area, and we can, let me see if this is gonna work for us. Again, we'll look at that in a moment. So this due diligence area, we've got a couple different fields that we can plug in. We've got one for community fit, and we're kind of just telling you, hey, use this text area to describe how the project advances the community's ED strategy or address other aspects of community fit. And in fact, if you don't want to call it community fit and you want to use this as some other area, we can do that. So normally this might be, we'll just put, just to help you kind of see how this comes together, community fit text area. If I put something there and we go back to our fact sheet, now we get the section here. So you could have written a whole paragraph or maybe even a couple paragraphs about the description of the project. Now you could put some paragraphs about the community fit. And let's say actually we didn't want that to be community fit. Maybe we just wanted to say, maybe we want it to be community notes or something like that, right? So just something different. We can modify that text up here. We can change it to be whatever we want. Go back, and now we see on our report, it's community notes. So you really get a lot of customization here. And so for whatever fields you want to use, we can actually add them to that fact sheet. So another one might be recommendation, say, give them an incentive. You might want to write out paragraphs and explain more about what this is. But we can see, if we add a recommendation, we can see now we have a recommendation section. Again, I haven't put a lot of text, but you can see if you added more paragraphs, it might look nicer. The other thing that we have would be another field for company notes. This is where we can talk about the company and explain any additional information about the company. So, company financial info or something, right? We might type in a whole paragraph about that. If we did that, that's going to pop up down here on this right-hand side where we're talking about the company. So all of those kind of due diligence fields that help you kind of, really kind of make a really nice looking project fact sheet are available to you here in this area. And we have this, if we click on this, and it popped up already for me, this PDF. It's just a due diligence checklist for economic developers that we put together. You may have seen this. This is something we've had for a few years that we've shared. Obviously, a big part of the due diligence, I think, is this economic impact and fiscal impact. This is kind of what you're doing normally with Impact Dashboard. But there are some other prompts here that can kind of help you think through a project and just make sure you feel good about the business or the company and how it's going to advance your community's goals. So this is kind of a good piece to reference maybe when you're trying to figure out what to fill in here. And so as we do that, that's really going to help you kind of fill in this project fact sheet and add some more details to it. Now, one thing I'll just kind of repeat here about the project fact sheet is we're not doing any analysis here. So if you notice, this is just repeating back the information that was submitted on the data form and that we kind of pulled into our scenario analysis and maybe modified. Again, here's our 75 jobs. And other text that we might have added. But there is no analysis or calculation, or there's no consideration of spin-off economic impacts or any of that kind of stuff. This is really just kind of presenting maybe to your stakeholders what the project is all about and just laying the facts out there in a nice formatted one-pager with your categories and so forth. Now this fact sheet, I should point out, kind of reacts or responds to our selection between the expansion only or the total combined. So remember, our expansion includes 75 jobs, but the company actually had about 100 existing employees. So if we did total combined, now we're going to represent that employment impact or the employment number as 175. And we'll actually note that it's 75 new jobs and 100 retained jobs. So as you make that selection up here, you're toggling everything. So kind of everything where we can kind of make a decision one way or the other, we're going to be tied to that toggle. So here on this project fact sheet, we're now showing the total annual payroll, which includes the new payroll as well as kind of the retained payroll. And it's still noting that this is at full operations in year 3. So if we go to our summary report, again, this is just kind of taking a look at what we submitted in that data form. So we've seen some of this before when we looked at the business retention and expansion projects last Thursday. So there isn't a whole lot of new information to show you here. The big idea was that we had copied that data form and basically assigned it to that project and then made a copy of it to create this scenario. If I close this, we're going to close the scenario and we'll go to look at our project. This was my test project. So here's our project control center for the test project. And we can see we've got our scenarios listed up here, just as we always do. So far, I've only got one scenario kind of noted here in parentheses. And this is the name of it. We can do all of those things as we did before, renaming it, copying it, or deleting it. If we see now, we've got the date prior to the update. We didn't list the date out here, but this is the date it was last edited. And then we have a new section on this page. You'll notice here, we're listing out all of the data forms that are assigned to this project. And so right now we only have one data form. That might be the typical case where you're only going to have one data form assigned to the project. So you get one data form, you create the project, and you're off and running. But if you had maybe needed to send the data form multiple times or something like that, you could have multiple data forms associated with the project. And so this one is that data form that was submitted by me, and it was submitted on September 22nd. And if I hover over here, we can say I can create a scenario. The other option here would be to move the data form. And I have a couple options of where I can move it. So I can take this data form and I can move it back to the inbox. Maybe I just screwed up, so I need to move it back to the inbox. Or I can create a new project, so I can kind of just go in a whole nother direction, forget this test project and create a new project. Or even, again, assign it to an existing project. Now, when we first assigned it, so we were in the inbox and we assigned it to this new project, we created a scenario. But for example, if I wanted to create a fresh scenario, I could do that. There's, I guess, two ways to do it, right? We could copy the one that we had been working on, or I can click Create Scenario. If you remember the one that I was working on, I had changed some of the information. We had put in some descriptions in that fact sheet. We had also modified the number of jobs from 50 to 75 because that's what they had called and told us. But if I wanted to create a project or create a scenario from exactly that original data form, you could do it by clicking Create Scenario here. If you wanted to kind of pick up where you left off and just do another iteration of the one that you had been working on, you would do that by copying here. The buttons at the top are kind of not so relevant at this point since we're kind of along on our way. If I were to click Add Scenario at this point, this is just going to add a blank scenario. This is that case where you've got the information, you're not going to use the data form thing, you're just going to type the information in. So this Add Scenario is only really relevant if you just want a blank starting point. The other one that we see here, which is kind of a nod to the way the data request feature was in the past, where we had a button up here that said Request Data. The process isn't exactly the same. So we're not going to request data on a particular project. We're actually going to share a data form. So if I were to click on this, we would go back to our data form area and be able to share a template. So if again, I'll just show how that works. If I click this button, it's going to take us back to our templates. This is our data form templates. And then currently I have 3 different data forms. And then I can choose which one I'd like to share to try to receive information and then create a project and scenario from there. So that's a little bit of the workflow there. We can kind of jump back over here on this left-hand menu. We can get to our recent projects. I was looking at test project there, so I can jump back to that if we want. And this is, again, the project control center. We can see my one scenario, my one data form, and so on. So that is everything I wanted to kind of get into there. You'll see those data forms pop in here. I think I have, let me find it if I can. It would be, if I search all of them and I find Project Easter, I had a data form from way back. So if you have been using data forms for years and years, you may have some that didn't come into the inbox and that maybe you didn't assign to a project. And so any data forms that you've kind of collected prior to about 2 weeks ago, they're going to look a little different. and they're going to look like this. So this scenario, so this, or excuse me, Project Easter is an old project that I worked on, and we can see it was earlier this year was the last time I really messed with it. The data form was actually submitted, if we look at this, way back in May 29th, 2019, and that data form, it was one of those old data forms that we couldn't really configure, but here it is, and now we can see it and we have access to it. If you remember, you could always see kind of old data forms. It would be like up here of view submitted data or something like that. There was a button up here to help you get to them. But now those will be kind of integrated into this new way of assigning data forms to an individual project. So you'll see that there if you've been a user of data forms over time. But now let's go back and let's talk more about actually sharing those data forms and sharing and kind of collecting the information. So one way that you might collect information on a project would be very targeted. We just want to send an email. And so, you know I want to send an email to Bob at XYZ Corp. And I'm going to say I can change any of this information. So I've got the email address is Bob. The subject, we can make that whatever we want. I feel like complete your data request from ED Corporation. We could change that up if we wanted to. We didn't like that. We could say ED Corporation data form or something, right? Anything you say there. And then this message you can modify as well. This is kind of a placeholder, just some generic text for you. And then this is my signature that'll get included in the email. And then the other thing that's going to get included in that email when I hit send here would be a link to a data form for Bob at XYZ Corp to submit his data form. So actually, I assume this is kind of a big made up email address, but let's just go ahead and do it. It's going to try and send an email to him, and it's going to copy me on it as well. So if I hit send, it's going to send that data form, and I'll know that it went through. I can kind of see the copy that I get in my email. And so that would be one way to send the data form, right? And if I wanted to kind of follow along with Bob as he's filling it out, we can kind of go to our inbox. And within the inbox, we have that in progress page. So I'm going to click on the in progress page again. And we'll be able to see, okay, September 24th, I sent a data form to Bob at XYZ Corp. And we can see that's where it sits right now. It's in progress. He hasn't submitted it. He maybe even hasn't even looked at it. So that's one way to do it, right? So that we took this data form, we wanted to use this version of our data form, this template. Again, I've got 3 different templates here. You may choose for your organization, you might only have one template. You're just gonna have one version of your data form. But I've got kind of like a basic form and then maybe a little bit more detailed one for different purposes, let's say. So that was kind of sending a data form, and that's kind of like familiar to people who may have been using the data forms in the past, where you could send an email and the prospect would get an email with a data form link, and they can complete that. Now, again, if that prospect gets it, it's going to look in the new format. It's going to have that data form wizard, and you're going to click through, and it'll be just like we've seen. But let's say actually I wanted to share that data form, but instead of sending it to an individual, this is the case where I want to just put it on my website. So I want to get a link that will kind of generate a brand new version of that template, the data form template, every time someone clicks on that link. And so the way to do that is click here on link. And this URL is what you would use to put behind, say, a button on your website that anytime someone clicks that button, it's going to generate a new blank data form for that individual, and they'll be able to fill it out. And if they want to come back to it later, it will give them a very specific, unique URL. It won't be this one. It'll give them a very specific URL for them to get back to that individual data form that gets generated when they do this process. So again, if I want, I can take this link. I can copy it like that, or I can just click copy here. It makes it easier. So I get it in my clipboard, and then I'd be able to, put it on my website, put it in my email signature, and say, hey, fill out your data form here, and whoever clicks on that link will get a brand new iteration. So if 10 people click on the link, you'll get 10 different data forms started from that one link. And so that is how this would work. The way, so when you are looking at the inbox, and let's say we're looking at our in progress column, We also have the ability to share in progress data forms. And so this is a little bit, it's maybe a sneaky difference, but if I click share on this, because let's say Bob got it, he got it lost, he started it, but then he lost the link or whatever it was, he deleted an email. And we just need to get Bob back to his data form that he started, or that we started for him, I guess. We can do that two ways. One is we can send that email again, essentially, so complete your data request from ED Corporation. And so this is the one that was in progress, and I hit send. It's going to send him the link, and he'll be able to get into this very, very specific version of the data form. The other way, say you're on the phone with Bob and you're going to send him an email, and you're not going to use this form, but you actually just want to grab the link. So now we're going to have a URL on an in-progress data form that will take someone to that very, very specific version of their data form. And so we can see this one actually doesn't even fit on the page as we click on it there. If I click copy, it's going to copy the entire thing into my clipboard, and then I'll be able to, for example, paste it into an email or something. So there is a little bit of a distinction here. If you want to get someone back to their data form that they are working on that is in progress, you can do that by coming here to our in progress list, hit share, and then either use the email or the link. And that's going to get them that very custom URL that gets them right to their data form. So you wouldn't want, you wouldn't want to give this to, this link for Bob. You won't want to give that to a prospect that started a different data form, for example. Now, if we get into the templates, these are kind of the blank starting points. If you want to share a template, there's two ways to do it. One is just send the link to a person individually, or you can see again, this is a much shorter URL, and this short URL is the one that's going to generate a brand new instance of that data form every time someone clicks on the link. If you were to share an in-progress data form link with 10 people, they're all going to go to that one in-progress data form. You don't want to do that. If you share this URL with 10 different people, it'll generate a brand new data form for them every time. This is a little tricky, I know. We've got a lot of information on the website. We're also going to kind of work our way through the list of clients and kind of see if they want any help or support in kind of configuring their data form and then getting it set up to post it on their website. So we will reach out proactively, Nicole and I, over the next couple of months, weeks and months, I suppose it's going to be a while. But we'll reach out, and if you want to schedule a time to kind of work on this together and make sure you fully understand it, we can do that. We'll be available for that. If you want to jump to the front of that line, just send me an email or give me a call, and we can get right into it. But again, these data forms, the best way probably for you to really understand how it works would be to kind of just start trying to fill it out yourself. And so you'll be able to configure one yourself and then go fill it out. And you'll see exactly how it's going to work for the prospect. And as long as you're just either sending it to yourself or whatever, you'll be able to follow along the entire process to see that the data form, oh, there it is, it's in progress. Oh, there it is, I submitted it. And oh, there it is, I assigned it to a project, for example. And so that's kind of the workflow you'll go through, is to configure, share the link, receive the information, and then create a project and scenario from there. Okay, so we are 45 minutes in, and I kind of finally wrapped up that bit about data forms that I wanted to touch on. And well, we talked about the fact sheet as well. I'll show you one thing that I was, the fact sheet that we were looking at didn't look like much, to be honest, because I was just plugging in a little bit of text here and there. One of the fact sheets that I prepared that actually looks pretty nice is in my example project here for Project DM. And this kind of gives you a sense of what you can do with that project fact sheet. As I'm pulling this up, feel free, again, any questions you have or topics you want me to address, type them in there, and we'll have time for sure. But this is my project fact sheet for Project DM. This one I've actually typed out a little bit more information, and we can see what it looks like here. So a lot of this stuff fills in for us because I've plugged in the NAICS code, for example, and then the timeline and so forth. But if I get down here, this text that we see, is what I've added. And so I wrote a description here describing, Project DM represents an existing business seeking to co-locate its manufacturing facility, right? The community fit aspect, it's going to advance our ED strategy by expanding advanced manufacturing sector. You can see that. And the recommendation, we are recommending granting 100% property tax abatement on inventories or something, and you can read that there. And even $1 million grant to help pay for necessary infrastructure improvements, right? So I've written this up, kind of this whole fake thing. We've also got our company notes that we see here. Company's in a strong financial position, cash reserves will fund the expansion, blah, 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 right? So we can, if we get into that detail, if we've kind of gone to that extent, and we want to kind of summarize everything that we've done, we can do that. Again, the place to put that information after we've kind of gotten it gathered up for us is here in this scenario and company information. We have the description here. I didn't put any internal notes, but that's okay. And then here is all of our due diligence fields, the community fit, recommendations, and company notes. Again, if you don't like the names of our sections and you want to use those text areas for a different purpose, you can rename these sections to be whatever you'd like. And then that will appear here on this fact sheet, and we can print it off. And this is a kind of an excellent one-page summary to kind of explain what you've been evaluating with the project, what your organization's take is on the project, and share that maybe in different forms. So, for example, might be something you include in an annual report. And kind of create a fact sheet for each one of your 10 projects you worked on in a year. You could include this cover page for that purpose. Or even on an individual analysis, you might use this as a cover page and then follow it up with the one-page impact report that shows the analysis of that incentive package that you've considered for it. So that is some of our thinking here. And again, if you're trying to find all those fields that are available to you that you just can't find, they're going to be over here in our scenario and company information. So you can find it here in our navigation and jump to different sections. Or if you're just trying to cut through and maybe quickly do an analysis without getting into all of the detail, and you're just really trying to run some numbers first, you can kind of do it, call it the old way, here on the scenario info tab, where we've kind of curated that list of fields and curated it to be just those fields that are going to help you run the impact analysis. All right, again, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to run through. If I'm thinking about the main takeaways here, there's a lot of new functionality. You have access to all of those fields and features in old scenarios. So if you wanted to go and create a project fact sheet for an old project, you wanted to kind of put in the square footage, that field wasn't available last time you looked at the project, you could go back and do that. But as a starting point for everyone, this blog post that we posted in the chat is a great place to start, where you can, once you kind of scroll past all this stuff, we get into all of the different features that we covered. And we can also take a look at this handout. The handout, I think, is one of the most useful documents that we have for kind of getting acclimated to the new pieces. First thing that you want to do, so to speak, is to configure your model so that you have all the different project types and industries that you want to use using your terminology. So that's a big one for you. If you were to kind of just knock that one off the list, that would be a big step in being ready for the next time you've got a project to evaluate. And then this handout, again, is really helpful to help you conceptualize that workflow in the wizard, that flow chart of how we're going to step the prospect through the questions we want to ask about their plans. And each field, so to speak, is listed out in this document. So this might be a little bit easier to digest than maybe clicking around the link, clicking around in the app, or trying to click through the wizard 100 times and try to wrap your head around it. If you look at that PDF document, that can help. And again, feel free to use this submit your data link here just to kind of, this will be my data form. So, if you want to do it on your own account, you can. But if you want to click on this, you'll be able to see that data form as it goes through. of every field. And again, in my example, I've included absolutely every field. You may not want to do that. That's why you can configure and remove certain fields and select exactly what that looks like. So I'm really just stretching this out at this point. So I appreciate everybody joining us today and on all the previous webinars. I'm sure there will be questions that come up, and we'll find brand new ways to use things, whether it's the fact sheet or the expansion analysis as we go along. But feel free to reach out to me with questions. Thanks so much for joining our webinars. We will be sending out an email kind of wrapping up everything a little bit with links to some of these additional resources, essentially these videos that we've created along the way. And that will be coming to everyone in their email. Thanks again, and appreciate supporting Impact Data Source and using Impact Dashboard. Thanks so much.